Welcome to the Second Bite podcast, where we talk with top entrepreneurs and CEOs about creating valuable companies through creative transactions. Now, let's get started with the show.
Welcome to the Second Bite podcast. I have a wonderful guest with me today, Joel Green from Outliant. Joel, happy to have you with us.
Thanks, Todd. Pleasure to be here. Excited to hop in.
Yeah, pleasure to have a good reason to chat with you in regards to your very recent transaction where you sold your agency to a Mountain Gate-backed company called Ignite. So we're going to unpack that a little bit. I want to start by thanking our sponsors. Our sponsor for the podcast are the good people at Rise 25. They help entrepreneurs create podcasts like this, actually, and do a wonderful job. They're wonderful people. Jeremy is responsible for the product that you are listening to or watching, depending. So thanks to our friends at Rise 25. So Joel, let's, if we can, start even before the beginning with Outliant. There were 4 owners and then a couple of key executives. Maybe just describe what Outliant does and who you do it for.
Sure. Yeah. So there was originally back in 2019, 5 founders that came together. And we kind of had the goal of starting an agency to build out a team so we could launch additional ventures, kind of more traditional VC type backed ones, but be able to bootstrap them more. And so as part of that, we kind of built the company around having the agency that we wanted to have for our ventures. So we worked with a lot of startups and stuff. And we really focused on web development, app development, marketing services, kind of the stuff you would expect for a tech startup. Started landing some larger clients. And over the years, as it evolved, we kind of, through happen chance, landed Orange Theory as a client. We kind of became one of the top Webflow development partners. They introduced us. And after we got Orange Theory, we started to kind of just get more of these multi-location franchise clients and really discovered that was kind of a great niche for us and just ended up being kind of the go-to web development agency for these kind of larger multi-location clients, and then looping in all the marketing services associated like CRO, SEO, paid ads.
And for multi-location, it gets pretty complicated pretty quickly, doesn't it, from a web dev standpoint?
Yeah, that's kind of what actually made us really interested in the space because, if we did a website for your typical company, you put up the pages, you set them up with the CMS, and that's kind of it. So they aren't these longer term retainers. But with multi-location, they may have much more complex needs, right? You've got thousands of locations. Each location needs a different page. You have to have all kinds of conversion funnels from the top level down to each location. And they're constantly iterating. They might be in new countries and you need localization. So it really made much more complex web projects something that we could focus on and generate a lot more long-term revenue than just traditional web.
Excellent. And so you landed some clients, then you landed some additional also in the multi-location space because of your developing expertise. So you've got a great business going. And then along the way, you started to incubate some other ideas. Is that what happened?
Yeah. So pretty early on, from day one, our goal was build the agency and partly just because we didn't know what startup to launch. And we knew an agency was something we could generate revenue with and learn about. But we, in 2020, started working on a telemedicine business and that started doing quite well. We launched a bunch of different random company ideas. A bunch of them we got revenue with, but they just weren't scaling like we wanted, or, we had this kind of one that died because of COVID and whatnot. But, as we went on, we kind of landed in this telemedicine space and had a couple businesses there that were doing very well. And so we just wanted to move our focus towards those more so than the agency.
And was the financial economic rewards much better with the telehealth than some of the others? or was it just more passion, or was it more complication on the agency side that drove you guys to the thought of, why don't we put this in other hands, the agency?
Yeah. So, with the telehealth stuff, we never really paid ourselves, no salaries, no profits or anything. And that was just because we had a very scalable growth model. And so we wanted to reinvest every penny into growth. So the agency was really our income source. But with a kind of subscription product business that targets a very large market in the US, once it gets scaling, it grows much more exponentially than an agency. And so, the revenue started to surpass, and we just saw the opportunity was much greater long term with telemedicine. And so, especially with the agency, you get lower multiples, it's harder to scale. And we just realized the amount of effort that it is dealing with clients all of the time, constantly trying to do B2B sales in the services space. It's a lot harder than just having ads. Then the consumer clicks, puts their card in, and you're just making money around the clock 24/7. So that kind of got the conversation going. Hey guys, telemedicine's where it's at. We need to find a new home for Outliant where, all the employees and clients can be happy, and we can, take some money off the table, but not be in the situation where the telemedicine keeps growing for a few years and then all of a sudden we lose complete interest in the agency and have to just shut it down with nothing.
Right. So at some point, you guys had the conversation that says, A, should we sell this? And B, is it sellable? And then C, how do we do that? Do you remember that conversation and what that was like?
Yeah, very well, actually. So, we always actually joked a little bit like, oh, should we sell it or whatever, but it was never a serious thought. And then maybe June or so of 2024, we kind of had this conversation I think we should start getting the company ready so that we can sell it. It wasn't necessarily we're going to sell right away, but it was before that, maybe we weren't as focused on EBITDA, or we didn't have certain parts of our books clean or whatnot. So by kind of Q3 going into Q4, we had just focused on separating out any kind of stuff that the ventures were tied in with the agency so that they were kind of completely isolated businesses, made sure we got our books nice and ready and had kind of a strong focus on EBITDA. And
can I ask there, Joel, you have a good grasp on the financials. Did you do all of that kind of, let's say, clean up and separating, this is what goes with the telehealth business and this is what goes with Outliant? Or did you have outside people that you relied on for that?
So I kind of led the high level initiative, and I have great other people on the team that worked with me to execute on that. We didn't really bring anyone outside. We did talk to a couple investment bankers in our network and just get their feedback, and some other mentors that have sold agencies before, just to make sure we were thinking about it the right way. But ultimately, we kind of led that internally.
When somebody brings that question to me, it's always better if it's clean. But oftentimes the world doesn't present that way, because if you don't have 4 or 5 partners and there's 1 or 2 and they're very busy and then they don't maybe know the financials as well and they don't know how to separate them, we can simply add back to the financials a lot of the things and make the adjustments on a go forward basis. When you went through that process, is there any advice that you might share as far as here's the core things to focus on and maybe the things not to worry about getting bogged down in as it relates to cleaning the financials and getting the company ready for a transaction?
Sure. I mean, I'll quickly touch on some unique things in our situation that might not apply to everything, and then more broadly. But, we were funding a lot of kind of research and development for new ventures directly on the P&L. And so that obviously was something that needs to be very well accounted for so that those can be removed and added back to the EBITDA. So we just made sure that part's clean. And, we also had maybe some bloat with operations that kind of was very helpful to launch ventures and have all of these processes around that, but wasn't really needed for the actual operation of the agency. So we kind of made sure everything's clean on the books, categorized for being able to get added back or kind of attributed to specific agency work, and then kind of cleaned up, either moved people over to the ventures directly rather than through Outliant, and fired a few people that were just maybe not really needed on the services. But ultimately, I think the higher level piece is like, you kind of want to look at what the data request is going to be from a buyer. So whether you've gone through a transaction before, or you have someone that can kind of show you some example P&Ls and balance sheets and all that, and then just work towards getting yours to look like that as much as possible. I think that's kind of the best approach we found.
Excellent. I'm going to ask more about, the data request and going through diligence and the rest in a minute. But you guys decided you want to do a transaction. What are the first steps in walking that forward?
Sure. Yeah. So after we kind of, focused on getting the business in a place where it was feasible, we talked to a few investment bankers that we just already had in our network. But they were kind of not really either an agency specialist, or they only did businesses that were larger. And so we didn't have a good, advisor to go with at the time, but we did get some helpful feedback. And we ended up working with a company called Axel, who helps connect you with M&A advisors that are kind of the right fit. So they connected with us with a few, we interviewed them, and ultimately that's how we started working with you, Todd. And I think you can try and sell business yourself, but I think an M&A advisor more than pays for themselves. So that was definitely our goal, to work with someone that was the right fit.
Yeah, and I think it was our experience for the type of deal that we got. But Axial, AXIAL.com, is a great place for people to go. The link will be in the show notes. So if you want to look around for other transactions or see what's listed or find deal flow or any of those type of things, Axial's a great place to go. And then we got connected through Axial, and then eventually just decided. I think we decided because, from my perspective, I'd be interested to hear yours. When you guys explained the business to me, a couple of opportunities jumped to mind in terms of who buyers might be, because this is our space and we know it quite well. When you guys just talked about the structure that you wanted, it was unusual, right? It was, you wanted to have everything up front in cash, and nobody does that, right? And so you were also reasonable around the flexibility, because if you want everything in cash, you just give up some value of the company, right? You get a lower value per se because you want it all up front. It shifts more risk to the buyer and so forth. The folks at Mountain Gate, who are great buyers in the digital marketing space, also have a company that serves multi-location clients or franchisor clients. And so that wound up being a really good fit, and ultimately the buyer, right, from that perspective. What do you remember about the beginning of the process, which was very focused? What do you remember about the beginning of the process, and then maybe some of the things that surprised you through the steps that we took?
Sure. Yeah. So, we were very transparent with all of our advisors that we weren't looking to min-max the valuation, and, we wanted to move quickly. From our perspective, once we had decided to sell, we were like, hey, let's just move as quickly as we can. Even if we take a small discount, let's try and get as much cash on close as we can. We didn't really want long earnouts. Only one of the founders was kind of going with the business. The rest of us had moved to the ventures. We did have a couple of partners that we had brought on later that went, so that helped maintain the business. But
the main issue is you just didn't want to distract. You wanted to be able to focus on telemedicine and what you guys were all doing there, and everybody's excited for that.
Exactly. And even like, for example, me and some of the partners that were fully on the ventures, you're never not like working on your agency, even if you're not working with clients who are doing sales. There's just things that come up. There's financials on my end that I have to review. There's always something, and just that looming stress that like, oh, something's going wrong, I need to jump in, was a huge distraction. And so we were like, we just want to get rid of it as quickly as possible and find a right home and get as much cash as we can now and not worry about min-maxing, because for us, the other opportunities we had were, one or two orders of magnitude larger in the long term than the agency ever would be.
Yeah. And I will say one of the really important things, I think, is that because I had reached out to a few groups, and what you just articulated there is exactly what we said to those groups. This is why we want to sell. This is where we want to go. This is the home we want. We want as much cash. And so they structured the deal, and maybe we can talk about that if you want. They structured the deal as an asset purchase, right? Because they were willing to move very quickly. And I think we closed the deal in 60 days or 65 days from when we signed LOI, and they moved very quickly there. And so Trent and Corbin did great work at Mountain Gate. So from that perspective, I think that for me was a great takeaway, and maybe for people listening, if you want to comment on it, but being open and transparent about why you want to do a transaction is I think very good advice, because it makes the buyer more comfortable if it's a logical fit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we and even going slightly before that, we had told the few different M&A advisors that we had met with that might be good fits our goals there, and they were all saying, well, we need to go through the full process, and it's going to be 6 to 8 months, and this and that, and we were willing to accept that, but we were kind of telling everyone like, hey, if there's a way to move faster, if we can, find a buyer pre-market, whatever, and Todd was really the only one that actually listened and said like, yeah, I've got a plan for that. And you came to us, was it February maybe, and said, hey, I've got a buyer. Like, we just hopped off a call and you called us. You're like, I know who can buy you. Like, we don't need to do the full process.
Yeah. So and the behind the scenes was I'd reach out to 3 separate groups that do franchise marketing. Mountain Gates, is always top of the list because they're a great private equity group. They've had great exits in the digital marketing space. I've had a good relationship with Trent for a long time. And I said, listen, here's the opportunity. I believe that you'll get it, quote unquote, below from where a full process is, but this is what the guys need and why. And they were willing to do that. Number one, they were willing to do it because it was a really, really good fit for them. They do web dev for franchise companies. They don't do it like Outliant does, right? You guys are top class from that perspective. And so they were thrilled to, and this is why Mountain Gate always has great results, right? They know that they already do that. They identified that you guys do it much better, and they would get a couple of clients, and they were not intimidated by you leaving because they already know that space. And John and Chris, who are their leaders at Ignite, know it very well. They're great executives. So it was a really, really good fit from that standpoint. And I didn't want to get an assignment and not be able to deliver on it, right? And we usually are 6 to 8 months is usually about right for a full process and the whole thing. This was more of a much more narrow process. And the fact that we could do an asset deal, and we'll talk about that right now, but the fact that we could do an asset deal meant that they could limit their exposure to quote unquote liabilities from that standpoint and allowed them to go faster. So because it was an asset deal, there was a couple of additional hurdles that we had to get through, like consent from customers and things of that nature. What do you remember about the difference? And do you think there was a really noticeable difference on your end from an asset deal versus an equity deal?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've done one asset purchase with a prior business before, so I was familiar with the structure. Overall, it's quite similar of a transaction, I believe, to a stock purchase. There's a few extra steps depending on how your contracts are structured and how employees and contractors you have need to move over. So we kind of got ahead of that early on. Obviously, we had to get all of our clients to sign a consent to transfer their contract over, which was a bit of a deadline we had to push through, and it came down to the wire, but we got it done. And then there's, various different tax treatments. For us, it actually was pretty favorable. Most of the sale was intangible assets, so that's going to be capital gains. And then because the partners that got added on had some phantom equity and some various other tax strategies, it was actually our preferred way to go about it. So overall, I thought it was easy and it moved fast. And I think by excluding the liabilities, it actually can speed things up quite a bit, because you don't have to go as deep in diligence on some of the excluded liabilities you might otherwise.
Very true. So, and you have how many employees at Outliant?
So we had maybe 15 full-time W-2s and then around 100 full-time contractors internationally.
Right. And so what kind of concerns did you have presenting to your workforce? And what kind of concerns did the buyer have about that and about the transition that maybe you're pleased that you did, or you wish you would have done differently?
Yeah, I mean, we were careful with who we communicated things to in the beginning, because we didn't want to get like a lot of concern and people thinking, oh, PE's going to come in and fire me. So
that's always the big question, right? Who do I tell and when? How did you guys think through that? And maybe you could share specifically, how you layered people in.
Sure. So in the beginning, it was just the partners discussing. And then once we had the LOI, we brought in kind of a few, like 4 other people that were going to be really important to go through the diligence process and the transition. So what
were their titles, Joel?
Yeah. So we had our head of HR. We had our head of engineering, who kind of works directly under Erwin. He was like the CTO that went with the business. We had our finance admin. So she kind of works with us to prepare a lot of financial reports and do manual data entry and things that were going to be pretty important for the diligence. And then we had Christy, who's kind of a multi-position title. I think she was like the sales administrative lead or something, but she was like the executive assistant to several of the founders for a long time. So she was always kind of on the inner circle with these things and could help us, manage our emails and pull data and get documents that, and we were.
And what was the biggest concern you heard from those initial 4?
I think they just wanted to know, like, is there going to be a change to the day-to-day, right? We're fully remote. We have, flexible policies. It was one, like, is anything changing? We were like, no, like, we've talked to them. We're going to keep everything the same there. And, your jobs are safe and all of that. And I think they were reassured by kind of the plan we had going into it when we told them, like, it's, it's more of a merger than like an acquisition in some ways. There's still going to be like the org reports up to Erwin. You're not going to just have a new boss come in completely. So I think we had a good plan going in, and that definitely made them comfortable with it.
And on those 4, did they have any interaction with the buyer or Mountain Gate or Ignite?
Yeah. So once we kicked off diligence, several of them were in kind of diligence calls, in email threads. They were moving documents into our Google Drive, where we put all of the kind of diligence documents and the data room and everything. So they were kind of in some calls and emails, but a lot of their work was more behind the scenes, just gathering data.
And them participating in that, do you think it made them more comfortable as opposed to more concerned about what life post-transaction would be like?
Yeah, I think it did, because one, they probably felt some autonomy, like they're actually part of it and they have some influence over it, right? Which I think always motivates people and makes them feel comfortable. And then 2, they just saw how great the Mountain Gate and Ignite teams were, and that it wasn't like this dark masked PE firm that just comes in and rips everything apart. They were, trying to be reasonable and had no plans of layoffs.
Yeah, I think, there's a reason why groups like Mountain Gate and others do so well. And it's because they're good people, they're good buyers, and people feel comfortable with them, right? So after you went through the initial 4, when did you announce to the larger group? Was it really after at the transaction?
It was like basically a week or so before closing. We kind of had an all hands internally where we announced it, and then a couple of days later, or like a few days later, we had the Ignite CEO and a couple of people from their team, like HR and whatnot, come in and have another all hands where they got introduced to the Ignite team, and kind of they were able to explain, hey, here's what Ignite does, here's the vision with Outliant, here's what the HR transition is going to be, blah blah blah. And I think people kind of got comfortable with that, so it worked well.
And what was the overriding message you shared with your people in that meeting, the all hands meeting, and what kind of feedback or concerns did you get from your workforce?
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one thing we wanted to focus on was like, hey, we're joining with Ignite. We're not going to disrupt the day to day. Everything's going to remain the same. Hey, we'll get a new email. We'll work with some new team members, but it's not like this huge change. So that was kind of a big focus on explaining to people, and then just also pitching on how we're very complementary. Hey, we're the like web, and we do some marketing like specifically around the web work we do. Ignite's like really focused on the multi-location marketing, SEO for every franchise location, doing that. And it's a great team. It's, a long-term plan, and that, it's going to be a great home for everyone, and they don't have anything to worry about. So I think people, I think they believed what we were saying, and they saw the evidence that, this was going to be good for everyone. And, there weren't that many concerns. Obviously, we had people saying like, hey, like, who's going to be the new boss and how's this going to affect X, Y, and Z? And they, they had normal questions, but I think people were pretty calm about it.
And I would imagine, because it sounds like, and I see this to be the case in most circumstance, the employee concerns are employee concerns. Are we still going to be remote? Are we still getting snacks on Friday? Do we get summers off, early release Fridays in the summer, or whatever the policies are, right? Was that your experience as well?
Yeah, I mean, that was most of the focus, is they just wanted to make sure that, they were kind of having the expectations we set when we hired them continue forward. And once they were confident in that, they felt like pretty good about everything.
And what would you say for you and the management team maybe was the biggest surprise going through the process, and maybe the biggest disappointment going through the process, if there was one?
Yeah. I don't think there were any like all of a sudden we were surprised by kind of a random turn around the corner. But I think one, we were a little surprised when, we kind of first had the conversation where you said, hey, I have a buyer. They want to, do the valuation you're asking for with like basically all cash. And we were like, okay, well, we'll see what happens. And then
I remember it was funny because I explained that to you and you said, okay, well, what does that mean? I'm like, I think it means what I told you. Why don't we do a phone call with them? Right?
Yeah. And then 2 days later we had the phone call and they seemed legit, and we were still skeptical reasonably that like, this would actually close. But then as it went on, we could see they were, pretty committed. And of course, like you said, it was such a good fit that I think that increased our confidence quite a bit. And then maybe the other surprise was like, we had the goal of moving quite fast with closing. I think we said like, hey, from LOI, it was going to be like 30 or 45 days. And from like the pre-LOI, like when we first just started talking numbers, it was like around that 60-day time. But we basically had like 30 days to do diligence. And we had to put a lot of time in. There was a lot of late nights. So if anything, it was, surprising that we even got it closed as fast as we did, because there was
we closed like April 1st, right?
Yeah.
And I'm looking at our engagement letter, which is January 27th, was when we got engaged. And, another interesting thing, as a random fact, part of the conversation that we had was, listen, you don't make a decision on a banker, right? Because you were talking to a few bankers. I'm like, we don't have to make a decision on a banker, but we should hunt this thing down, because I felt quite convinced on Mountain Gate as the buyer. And our engagement agreement, if you remember, says we have a tail period on one buyer, and that's Mountain Gate. So if this doesn't work well, and you don't think we know what we're doing and we're not good at it, and this falls apart, you're not obligated to do anything further with us. I think for us, it gives a chance to prove we know what we're doing and we know good buyers and the rest. But I will say that's 60 days. And so if you're listening to this and say, hey, let's call Todd so that we can have cash in our account in 60 days, we don't do that, right? It's the only time I've had a deal go this quickly. It was an asset-based deal. It was the right, great buyer. It was a flexible seller. It was all the right things. So I guess there are circumstances when all that can happen, but it was great to have all the planets align in the right way and to get a great transaction. So, that would be my comment from my perspective, and I appreciate you sharing from yours.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was just the stars aligned, I think.
It really did. Any last thoughts or advice that you would share as we wrap up?
I mean, hard to think of anything specific, but I guess depends on what your business is, but definitely, talk to a few different M&A partners, understand things. I think the time to move fast is once you really understand, like, hey, this is like a realistic valuation. These are realistic terms. This is what we want to do. Then move fast. Leading up to that, make sure the business is ready. You're going to be able to go through due diligence. You have the right M&A partners you're talking to. That's kind of the key that we found from the whole thing.
And if if Joel had to do everything, we wouldn't have been 60 days. I mean, you had a team of 4 people. They all had their slices of material that they would upload into the data room and all the pieces that they would do. It is a lot of heavy lifting, just moving it through. Jordan Savitz, we should shout out to him, who from Baker Donaldson was tremendous. And I know you guys did plenty of late night calls, working through stuff and getting documents done. And I think he had a really great balance between making sure you were protected and being judicious in the things that he was going to grill back on.
Yeah, he was fantastic. There's no way we would have closed on time if it wasn't for him being on calls with me till midnight for pretty much every day for the last 5 or 10 days leading up to close. There were hundreds and hundreds of documents of legal pages to go through, and for most of it we weren't too concerned. Like, it was boilerplate cleaning up legal stuff that lawyers can kind of hammer out, but just around some of the restrictive covenants, we just wanted to make sure that there wasn't going to be complications with conducting business for our telemedicine companies. And then there became some complications because corporate practice of medicine makes things weird, but we got it all figured out on time. And that,
so let's just take 1 minute on that. Well, before we close, Mountain Gate, like most good buyers, said very clearly, we are comfortable. We don't want to restrict you from making a living in the future. However, we don't ever want to compete against you. We're writing you a good sized check. We don't ever want to compete against you. Fortunately, you and your partner said, we don't want to be in the agency business anymore. So that part was easy. Where there was a little bit of gray area is part of your future and some of the things that you will grow may be multi-location companies. And you internally will do the marketing for those multi-location companies, right? And and it was super easy for Mountain Gate to say that's not a concern of ours. You're going to make some, and then of course you own a piece of this and maybe a little piece of that. And there's a whole bunch of layers. But there's always issues like that, I guess is my point. And to have a good partner on the other side and good lawyers that understand the business purpose of legal documents allows us to get to a point where you can close, right? Anything you would add to that commentary?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best thing is to just explain in as much detail as you can to kind of all the parties involved and not go through this game of telephone. Because we had some back and forths where, I would work with Jordan and we'd send over a red line and they'd say, well, you have this loophole in here that makes it so if XYZ, you can basically compete. And we're like, well, that's not our goal. But then there's with corporate practice of medicine, we have to provide services and this and that. And finally, everyone got on a call. I explained all the weird nuances. They understood. And then that's when we kind of finally very quickly got a final.
And there's a process to that, right? The lawyers have to do their thing. It whittles the stuff down. And then you do what's known as an all hands call. And literally people are like, oh, well, shit, if that's what you're saying, we're not worried about that. Or they're worried about it this way. So if you do it that way, we'll be fine with it. And you come to conclusion. So again, finding the right buyer, having it be a compelling fit for them means that they want to make it work. You guys want to make it work. That's the foundation of really getting any great transaction done. And I do think that this will be one of those great transactions. So congratulations to the folks at Mountain Gate because they got a wonderful asset for their Ignite portfolio company. Congratulations to you and your partners. This is a great assignment for me to work on. So I'm glad that we were able to do that. And I appreciate you joining us and wish you only the best with your efforts in the telemedicine business.
Well, thank you so much, Todd. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Second Bite podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.